James Gunn's new DCU is here, and it is time to break down what is and isn't canon. Hey Internet, I'm Chris, and this is the place on the internet where I talk about comics, movies, games, and things I'm generally passionate about. So we're a couple weeks away from Creature Commandos premiering, and it's the first project in James Gunn's new DCU. Now, James Gunn, before he became co-CEO of DC Studios, he had made The Suicide Squad, Peacemaker Season 1, but now that he's CEO, this is the first project that is actually canon to the DCU. Previously, we know Zack Snyder created the DCEU, which, to be honest, never really fully got off the ground. It had a lot of starts, restarts, reboots, and I like to think that this new DCU with Creature Commandos is not really a reboot or like a remake or whatever you really want to call it. What I'm thinking is that it is much like the DC continuity in the comics where it doesn't make much sense, but hey, we're going to go along with it. If you've ever read DC comics, you know that they've had a history of rebooting continuities, have had multiple Earths, and I think James Gunn is trying to sort of walk that line between creating a canon and a continuity that fans can follow while also allowing filmmakers like Matt Reeves to create great stories without being beholden to a universe or a continuity that makes no sense. Particularly with the Batman, we've gotten the Batman, the Penguin was fantastic, and if we didn't have this sort of Elseworld structure in this new DCU, we wouldn't have gotten the stories. But what's cool is that now that Creature Commandos is coming out, James Gunn has been doing press for that series. There's a really great interview with James and Creature Commandos executive producer Dean Lorey about this new DCU, the start of it with Creature Commandos, and James, I think, does a really good job of sort of breaking down what this new canon is.
Real simply, nothing for sure is canon unless you see it in Creature Commandos forward for the DCU.
Okay.
Now, in Creature Commandos, you'll hear them talk about things that happened in Suicide Squad or Peacemaker. Well, then those things automatically become canon. The truth is, almost all of Peacemaker is canon, with the exception of Justice League of Earth. Kind of deal with in the next season of Peacemaker.
Oh, okay.
But really, to be totally sure, everything that's purely canon is Creature Commandos through Superman, through Lanterns, Supergirl, Peacemaker season 2.
And what really sort of is interesting is that it all begins with Creature Commandos. So basically, as he says it, is that if it is explicitly stated or talked about in Creature Commandos, it is canon. If it hasn't been talked about, it's not. And the same thing goes for Peacemaker Season 2 and Superman. So there will be things that may be plucked from the DCU and talked about. And what I find kind of fascinating about Creature Commandos is that despite it sort of being an animated series, based on the response that people have had, there haven't been full reviews, but people have already gotten to see the whole season, a good chunk of it, and they've shared that it's a true launch of the DCU. It's not something where it's like, hey, like an appetizer. There's full connections to the larger DCU, and James has referenced the fact that some big characters are in the series that are not sort of being advertised outside of the main continuity. And with Creature Commandos, what's interesting about the cast is that all of the main cast were casted with the idea that they would appear in live action. And we're already seeing that with Frank Grillo, who's going to be playing Rick Flag Sr., who appears in Creature Commandos, Superman, and Peacemaker Season 2. So he's kind of the thread that connects it all when it comes to the DCU. He's a lot like the Nick Fury of this new DCU, which is interesting because, I think Rick Flag Jr. was a fun character. Obviously, he passed away in the Suicide Squad, was killed by Peacemaker. But, Frank Grillo has always been a character actor, someone in the background. So to kind of see him get this spotlight is really interesting. And I am fascinated by what connects. What is it about his character that really brings the DCU together? In interviews, Frank Grillo has shared that, through those 3 projects, Rick Flag Sr. is at a different point in his career at each stage. So I wonder if he's, moving up that corporate ladder or that military ladder and being held accountable for a lot of these metahumans. And what James shared about this new DCU, what the universe looks like, when asked if there was a golden age of superheroes. In this DCU, superheroes have always been around, metas have always been around, so mass vigilantes and superheroes. But at this moment in time, there are more than ever, and that has created a problem. And it is probably what's going to be the stage that is set for Superman, where you have a bunch of superhero characters showing up. Maxwell Lord leading his own team with Mr. Terrific, Green Lantern, Guy Gardner, and Hawkgirl. So we'll see maybe a version of the Terrifics or Justice League International. And I think it sets the stage for what Lex Luthor is probably going to think. And if Lex Luthor doesn't like Superman, I don't think he really likes metas either, unless they're working for him in his government projects. And, James obviously shared all that about Creature Commandos. And there's some interesting things that we've seen even in the trailers. You obviously have Amanda Waller, who's played by Viola Davis. But you saw there's a short clip in the trailer of Clayface, which is a Batman villain. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Batman will be referenced or actually appear in Creature Commandos. And what James shared in that interview with IGN is that there are some big characters that appear in the series who are integral to the DCU, who, they're probably the exception when it comes to casting the voice actors that are going to appear in live action and stuff. So that makes me think that, hey, will we get a Batman, or will there be other big superheroes or background characters that we see that have not been cast? And I think that's a good way of kind of hiding things, because I think if you cast a Batman or any of those characters, it's obviously going to leak and there's no way to hide it, and then it becomes a whole thing. But Creature Commandos is going to have a lot of surprises, especially in how it sets the stage for the DCU. And when it comes to canon, in terms of the previous iterations of certain characters, Peacemaker Season 1 is fully a part of the DCU, except that one scene at the end of the season finale where you see the Justice League appearing not right on time to help Peacemaker. You get that joke between, Aquaman and the Flash, which was a great moment. But obviously, if you have a new DC universe, that does not make any sense. And he talks about that Peacemaker Season 2 will address that in some shape or form. And, with the DCU, in terms of the timeline, you have Superman, you have Peacemaker, and then in 2025, when it comes to Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, and Lanterns, they'll be coming out around the same time. So both of them are ramping up for production, and they're going to shoot sometime early next year. And we know that Lanterns will be integral to the larger DCU, because we know Hal Jordan, Kyle Chandler, John Stewart, who's played by Aaron Pierre, are going to be investigating an Earthbound mystery that has larger implications to the DCU. And, Creature Commandos, it's not the easiest thing to be oh, that's what you start a universe with. But the phase of this chapter of the DCU is called Gods and Monsters. Well, they're the monsters. So it makes sense. And also, I think when it comes to the sensibilities of James Gunn, and also what I think it's an interesting way to sort of get people excited. And, what he did with Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, really changed a lot of people's perspectives of what can be adapted into these large, big superhero universes. So if he can do that with Creature Commandos, where he creates these characters that, honestly, it's an obscure comic book. There's not an ongoing Creature Commandos book. There have been series, you've had Frankenstein, Agent of Shade, you've had the Creature Commandos appear in Weird War Tales. You have a miniseries going on right now, but that's mainly to kind of promote the show. But, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, they're not an A-list team. So if he's able to elevate it by making this the birth of the DCU, I think it's a great way to kind of kick it off. And I do sort of respect his approach to canon, because in that interview, he also shares hey, these are not real events. We take them really seriously, but I think you should be able to trust the audience and treat them as adults, and they understand that, hey, you can meet people, in movies and stories, you sometimes never meet people at the beginning of their journeys. So it's not like you need to make an origin story for every single character. And I think I've always appreciated, especially when it comes to like really diving into a world and the lore, when I learn things from just the background, just a little character, just a phrase here and there. And that really sort of gets us excited and all diving in. I don't need it explicitly like shown for me. Like I don't need, Sinestro at the end of Green Lantern putting on a yellow lantern ring. Like I get it. He's gonna turn into a yellow lantern. Like I don't need it sort of like blown in my face. And I also don't need to see the Waynes die again and Martha's pearls drop on the floor. So I think him respecting the audience and treating them like adults and being like, hey, there are things that you can discern that, hey, this is canon to the DCU, but also we're not going to hold ourselves back because we have this continuity. Like, if there's a great story to be told, we will tell it, and we will respect the audience, we will respect these characters, and we will only go forward with projects we fully believe in. And I am excited to see it because it's, as much as Marvel has changed the game, like what Peter Safran and everyone is doing with this DCU has never been done before. You're creating a universe that's already lived in, a universe where animation, live action, and video games are all tied together in a really intricate way. So I can't wait to see what that looks like, especially on the video game side. I know he's really cooking up something really interesting. So I think it also opens up the possibilities of what characters can be adapted. You can get really interesting things like the Creature Commandos. I am hoping for a question show eventually. Like, let's see Vic Sage in HBO, especially the way, conspiracy theories run rampant in our society today. I think we could really use a question series. But yeah, I think, to sort of sum everything up, when it comes to the DCU, everything that happens after Creature Commandos is canon. If it happened before, it has to be referenced in that series or in events afterwards. And the only thing that's a little boo-boo is the end of Peacemaker season 1. But most of that is canon, and I would sort of compare it to what is Young Justice. In the Young Justice universe, there are things that have happened in other animated series like the Green Lantern animated series, or animated short films like the Green Arrow short film, that are kind of canon to Young Justice. The way Greg Weisman describes it is that they kind of run parallel, like a version of those events happen in the Young Justice world. Maybe not exactly like that. And I like to think James Gunn DCU is just like that. The Suicide Squad happened. A version of those events happened. Now, is it the same version of Harley Quinn, Bloodshot, and Peacemaker that showed up in that? Who knows? Maybe not. But it allows them to sort of have that flexibility and not be tied to a version of the DC live action movie universe that frankly failed and never got off the ground. So yeah, I'm excited for this. I'm hoping that it is as amazing as the reactions have been to it. What do you guys think? Are you excited for the DCU and Creature Commandos? Let me know what you think of the new canon and what you think should be continuity. Do you miss the DCU, or are you glad that, hey, we need a fresh start? Let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, and peace.